You push yourself to just do a little bit more, and you test the limits of your own capabilities. Security is a feeling, it's not a thing.
For many people, hearing about investment portfolios or wealth generators can seem all too hypothetical. Yeah, it'd be nice if I actually had the funds to do it. So today on Money Talks, we are joined again by Robert Whelan to give us his expert advice on how to build your first €10,000. Robert, you are very welcome to Money Talks.
Delighted to be here.
So 10,000, is that the type of figure that a person should aim for if they want to feel financial security?
It's not a bad one. It's a good starting point. Usually financial security is tied to your take-home pay. So if your take-home pay per month is 2,000, well then 10,000 makes you feel incredibly secure. If your take-home pay, if you're lucky enough, is 8,000, you might feel 10,000 doesn't make you so secure. So I would say it starts with that. But yeah, for most people, it's a great starting point.
That's interesting. So it kind of almost comes back to that emergency fund thinking or formula.
Yeah, because most security is a feeling, it's not a thing. So, and it tends to be then, well, what's the environment that's feeding into that? And if the environment is, I'm taking home 2,000 a month, I feel really secure, and that emergency fund of 5 months pay versus if it's a larger salary, you don't feel as secure. That's basically it.
You have a list for us today.
I do. I like a list.
Yeah, so it's 7 steps to building your first 10,000. We should say that this can also apply to your first 100, 500, 1,000.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's get straight into it. Number 1, treat financial security as a goal and not a wish. Can you explain that?
Yeah, like if you decide to do something, then make it a goal. Don't just say, I hope to have. The biggest problem with any setting a target like this is you have to make a personal commitment to it, because any goal, any habit requires discipline, commitment, and a bit of pain. And we're all human. So when we've made a commitment that we're going to do something, that moment where we decide to break the habit that's going to affect our goal, we check ourselves and we go, no, I made this commitment. This is what I'm going to do. And so I'm going to say, you have to make that first step of saying, I'm going to do this. The plan I have is realistic in terms of timeline or the amount, whatever it is. It's not like I'm going to save 100,000 in 5 years type stuff. It's going to be realistic with your level of income. And then, because if you don't do that, all the other steps I'm going to come to are irrelevant, because they'll all fall down on the fact that you haven't made that commitment to yourself at the start.
So in very simple terms, you need to know how much you're going to save every month.
Yes, and it needs to be achievable. Like any target or any goal and even in work, people watching, listening to this will have been given unrealistic targets or unrealistic KPIs by their organisation, and they'll see them and they'll go, not happening. Yeah. So they never get done. And so what's the lesson learned from that? Apply it to your own self. If you set something that's unachievable, you'll give up. So 4, 5, 6 months in, a pinch point will come, you'll give up. So it must be achievable. So we're talking today about like 10,000. Well, it's just a question of, well, how much of my net disposable pay can I realistically set aside or realistically come? And we have a couple of tips about enhancing that, but am I comfortable knowing I'll be able to commit to that and I'll get that done in X period of time, rather than I'm going to save this and I don't care I don't care what everyone else says, I'm going to get it done in 2 years. And then what happens is after 6 months, you're 10% of the way and you lose heart.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, though, about the similarity to unachievable KPIs.
Yes.
And setting goals. And I wonder then, because if you think about all the savings challenges that go all around the internet, a lot of them do start with a very easy, accessible goal, and then you build up over time. So you might start in month 1 saving, 20 quid. Yeah. And then it builds up. And I guess it's a psychology that built into it.
It is. Like, at the end of the day, money is about people as much as it's about figures on a spreadsheet. And the first step is the hardest to take, but it's all about habits. And anyone who read James Clear's book, it's great about building habits. So the habits all come from doing something consistently, but not overextending yourself at any stage, because then you break the habit. So, but it's the best behavior is once you found that the habit gets a little easy to do, you then push it a little bit. So if you're going to the gym and you were lifting X weight for a couple of months, I can lift a bit more. You push yourself, lift a bit more. The last time I was in, I equate finance a lot to health because I think it gets people to understand it a bit. You push yourself to just do a little bit more, and you test the limits of your own capabilities. And you go, actually, so like for instance, if you're saving 100 a month and you find actually it's okay, very quickly go to 150 and just see. And like, God, that left me a bit tight. Maybe 140. And then you go next month. Actually, that was okay. And you do that for a few months and you might find it. So just constantly pushing yourself, extending yourself, not getting comfortable with the amount because you might be missing the opportunity to get to your goal a bit quicker.
Yes. And this brings us to number 2, which is pay yourself first.
Yeah. Like too many people spend what's left over. You have to treat, if this is a goal and it's a serious goal and you have to make that commitment, you have to treat it as a bill. So if you pay your rent the first of the month, you have to treat this savings goal the same way as you would your rent. It has to be as important to you as paying your rent, paying your phone bill, paying your loan, whatever it is. It has to be treated that way, because once that's done, you won't be in that situation where you're faced with making a choice when it's 4 days before payday and your mates drop a text and they go, we're all going out tonight. And you're going, God, I'm supposed to save that 150 quid. It's in the account. Fuck it. And you end up spending it. Whereas if it's gone, you look in the account and you go, well, I don't have it, so therefore I can't spend it.
Yeah, yeah. Number 3 is really about the money that's coming in. So number 3 is focus on increasing income, not just cutting costs.
Yeah, I like this one because particularly I'm imagining most of the people who will be looking at this maybe in their 20s or 30s, right? And it is a challenge. Pardon?
Like myself.
Absolutely. And it is a challenge. I've left that a long time ago. It is a challenge to find the capacity to be able to do these things. So the point behind this is, if I was to, let me kind of wrap it up for you, is, so the point behind this is too many people, particularly when it comes to, let's start with your job, because that's your main source of income. I speak to lots of employers. Lots of my clients are business owners or they're senior executives, senior leaders, senior managers. Believe you me, the one thing they hate hearing from somebody at a pay review is, I need a pay increase or I want a pay increase. It's almost like then it becomes a confrontation. Most people, and I've done a little bit of coaching with this with people down the years, if you say to them, listen, I understand what the pay increases are. What value can I add to the company that you can afford to justify to pay me more? And if you go to an employer and go, I understand you don't want to pay me more than 4% extra than what I'm doing at the moment, but is there anything else you could get me to do? Is there extra responsibilities, extra tasks, or is there a qualification I could pursue which meant that will go up a pay grade? Have those types of conversations with your employers. In my opinion, you are far more likely to get a positive result than a negative one from that conversation.
Yes.
You'll mark yourself out from your peers, but more importantly, your employer will go, yes, and they'll find a budget to be able to give you a bit more. And I've seen that myself, just by asking for it or saying, I can do a bit more, can I get it? Can I earn a bit more? Start with that source before we get into side hustles a bit later. Start with that first and treat that as a great opportunity, because you'd be amazed the amount of employers could go, well, actually, yeah, we'd love if you could do this, this and this. Can you make the time? Yeah, I could get that done for you.
Yes.
And they'll pay you a bit more.
Yeah. And this is slightly similar to your point, but it's some advice I got recently. It was in a piece that we actually put out in this. Can't recall now off the top of my head who said it, but it was to go to your manager and say, what do I need to do this year in order to get a pay increase in a year's time? Because that kind of, it takes the pressure off, but that there is almost a sort of a contract of sorts. And if you get there, and I like the idea that it's kind of baking it in.
Yeah, it's being proactive rather than reactive, and it's demonstrating to the employer that you're prepared to do something above and beyond than you're currently doing, and they love to hear that. And all you're doing is being reasonable and asking for a little more money to do it.
Yeah. Number 4, avoid lifestyle inflation. Easier said than done.
It is. So it comes up a lot, and it is, I believe, the biggest reason why people can't really get into a proper savings habit or can't accumulate wealth is because they get into a certain stage whereby every pay rise becomes funding lifestyle today than trying to do something for tomorrow. So, and as it's long thought about, and I talked about it the last one I was in, but the premise is that because I'm earning more, I should be doing more, I should be spending more, and the quality of product that we buy, the quality of a holiday that we take, the quality of car that we buy, all those little things start to notch up because we're making a bit more. Yeah. So, but if, again, bring it back to the very first step, I've made the commitment. I've decided to do this. How you can avoid lifestyle creep is by making sure that you stay disciplined to the core habit, which is, I understand I just got a pay increase. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to take all of it. I'm going to take half of it and I'm going to use the balance of it because I set myself a goal to have this amount of money saved in this amount of time. So therefore I can actually get there quicker. And I always say, like, windfalls should be treated as adding to your capital rather than a great capacity to go and blow it on a holiday or something like that.
Yes, yeah. It's funny though, we do treat windfalls differently. I think it's a cognitive bias, that just makes us think free money.
Yes, and again, I hate these people who it's perfectly human, it's perfectly normal. But this is the context of, how do I save my first 10k? You're just going to have to do those things that go against your better nature.
Yes, yeah. Number 5 is develop a second income stream.
So this is the TikTok side hustle. Find something else. So what I would say here is that be realistic. So again, social media will tell you there's a million ways that you can do these little side hustles. Where I find, particularly if you have the time, because really what you're trying to say is, I can do my current job and I can do it really well, because what you don't want is to take on another responsibility that negates on your primary earning, and then you lose your job or something happens there. So you've got to have the capacity, whether it's weekends, additional time, maybe you work 4 days a week, there's an additional day. And find a skill that's close to what you're doing, or a job that's close to what you're doing at the moment, and see if there's a way that you can freelance on that. There's loads of sites. And I'm not here to give people loads of ideas. They're all on websites: dog sitting, babysitting. Recently, I had a 22-year-old come to me and he said, like, I want to make more money than I'm currently making. And I said, well, you're 6'2", you played rugby for years. I said, why don't you just do a bit of landscaping for people? I said, no one can get anybody to do anything. Just drop a text into your neighborhood group. He got like 10 jobs that paid him like $4,000. Because everyone was delighted to get a big strapping lad dig a hole. So I'm just saying, like, it can be as simple as that, and do it over Saturdays and Sundays. So leaning into stuff like that, but make sure it's reasonable. Make sure your income expectations, don't think, oh, this is going to be great, I'm going to make so much money. But if you have the capacity to take on extra responsibility, and for instance, it could be, as a friend of mine for years did bar work at the weekends. He just literally Friday and Saturday nights he did bar work. And between tips and salary, that was what got him his deposit for his house. He just made that commitment. It was easy to do. It didn't interfere with his job. Social life wasn't great for a while, but it was okay.
Yeah.
He didn't take every shift. But it got him in a position to be able to do it.
So maybe you can look at that as almost like a short, sharp shock as well. If you're saying, if there's a goal in mind, maybe that's the way to do it. Because I think long term,
it'd burn you.
I think side hustles burn you out.
I do, completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's not sustainable. We need the capacity to be able to enjoy our time, or else we resent it. We resent going to work. If all you do is work and you get nothing for it, you start to be the person on the hamster wheel going, I'm going nowhere here. I'm just going all the time at the same pace.
Yes.
There's nothing in it for me.
Yes. Number 6, treat windfalls as capital. You kind of touched on this.
I did, yeah. So, because too often it comes in, I think one of the tips is always do a tax return. So particularly if you've changed jobs. Now, it's less prevalent than it was since they moved to payroll modernisation about 4 years ago. But if you have medical expenses, or you've due tax back for whatever reason, I remember when I got tax back, it was great. That's the holiday budget, right? So if you get that type of windfall, if, for instance, you have a small inheritance, like an aunt left you €1,500 in their will, take 500 and do something with it, but bank the 1,000. Or if you want, spend 1,000, bank 500.
Yes.
But back to, I'll keep coming back to, you made a commitment. So if you made a commitment at the start that this is what you wanted to achieve, well then when you get these little temptations as you go along the way, you have to decide, well, is this breaking my commitment or not? So if you get a windfall, well, you never got it anyway. So what difference has it made to your life yesterday? Nothing. So take it, bank it, and then you're closer to your goal. And then what you're doing is you're making you're giving yourself the opportunity to get to that goal quicker, which means maybe the next 10,000 can be achieved a bit quicker.
Yeah. And you know what I think as well, Robert? I think sometimes just doing nothing for a couple of months, when you get that windfall, just doing absolutely nothing and letting it settle. It takes a frothiness out of it, that kind of frothy, like...
Granny had a great saying, act in haste and repent at leisure.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Leave all financial decisions like that. Particularly, no, if it's a significant windfall, absolutely take your time. But that always makes sense, because unless it's an emergency, you don't need to buy it now.
Yeah, absolutely. The final one on the list is don't try to get rich quickly.
I find this is the biggest one. I was at a conference recently and they showed this chart and it blew me away, and it said that the age cohort that's most susceptible for scams and hacking are not the over 65s, it's the under 25s. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The person making the presentation said one was they're online more, so they're more susceptible. But two, they're almost more desperate because they feel like the only way they're actually going to make that leap is by believing the impossible, believing that they can make that generational leap very quickly in this, whether it's NFTs, crypto, meme stocks, etc., etc., etc. So I always say getting rich slowly is a great business to be in.
Yes.
And if you're always chasing the easy, there's an old saying that like when opportunity knocks at the front door, you're out the back looking for 4-leaf clovers. Like it's just about understanding that if you're doing, in my experience, people who do the boring stuff consistently, they focus on making sure that they're making the most of their income, they're saving consistently, they're building capital. They end up, by playing the longer game, they end up much better off when they get to my age in their 40s and their 50s. I've seen it. I see it every day. And the people who chased it and gambled, some get lucky. That's the point. And the problem is with social media is all you see are the winners. You see all the winners. But with every winner, there's 30, 40, 50 losers, or maybe 10,000 losers. And if you're constantly chasing to be that person, I just think it leaves yourself at a high risk of missing your goal, which is the object of the exercise.
Yeah, yeah. So in practical terms, if somebody wanted to get to 10,000, let's say they're saving 50 quid a week. That's about, I beg your pardon, 50 a month. That's about 16 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
So that's an awful lot of time.
It is.
So talk to me here. Maybe are there other ways in? Like what about investing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's right. So yes, it makes total sense to take advantage of the fact that money in the market over a medium to long period of time will significantly outperform money that's sitting in cash. So again, you're looking at historic stock market returns now over the last 100 years are close to 11% per annum. So that's not to say they go up 11% every year. They obviously can drop 25, 30, 40%, but they can go up 35, 40%. So if someone was to take the deposit account route, it's going to take them 16 years. That's it. You're getting less than 1% interest on your savings, and you will get there, but it's going to take you ages. If you go into a well-managed fund, whether it's a basket of indices, don't individual stock pick, because whilst you could get lucky and get in on the next Nvidia that goes from 100 to 1,000 in a year, you might buy something that goes from 100 to 10 in a year. So again, a good index or a managed fund or something like that.
I'm just going to stop there because not everyone knows what an index fund is. Can you explain it to us like we're 5-year-olds? Okay,
so everyone has access to an app of some description for making payments, whether it's Revolut, N26, but there's others such as Trading 212, Interactive Brokers. Others are available, right? What you can do is you can make a deposit in there, and instead of saying I want to buy a share in Tesla or I want to buy a share in Microsoft, I want to buy an index. And then what I'm going to do is like a basket of 500 or 1,000 shares. And what you're doing there and then immediately is you're diversifying your risk. You're making a decision that you're happy to forgo the gain of one complete brilliant stock for the chance that it could fall as well, because you're going to buy the average in the market. They tend to be a low-cost way for people to get involved in the investing game because you can do it directly from your phone. You can drop the money in regularly. And what you're doing is you're incrementally benefiting from those market increases. And by saving every month, if there is a downturn and you're saving for a consistent period, maybe it's 5 years, whatever the case may be, you should treat that as an opportunity to continue saving. Don't stop. Because if the price of stuff is falling, and your outcome is 5-6 years away, buy today in the expectation, not the fact, but the expectation that in 5 or 6 years' time, you'll be rewarded for buying those shares, those indices as they were falling. Because history has proven that over time, equities outperform cash. Yeah. So an index fund is simply a fund of 500 or 1,000 individual shares. There's ones that track the global stock market. There's ones that track the US stock market, the European, the emerging market. There's ones that will just give you exposure to car manufacturers, if that's what you want, space technology companies, if that's what you want. I think there's something like 13,000 ETFs out there. So you can find something, they're relatively cost effective. You can get them all via technology, and they're a much more attractive way of saving into the market than trying to find winners yourself. You know what I mean? Within an individual stock on the stock market. But it comes at risk.
Yeah. So getting back to the saving model, so we're putting in 50 quid a month, 16 years to get to 10,000. The next question, I know this is like how long is a piece of string, but ballpark, how long would it take to get to 10,000 if I was investing 50 quid a month?
Depending upon what returns were obviously achieved over that period. If you did it over the last 10 years, you might get it done in 8.
Okay.
Because the last 10 years have been the best 10 years in the history of equity investing. This is the golden age. If you took the average 10 years, it might take you 12.
Yes.
So if you kind of say, well, is this the new paradigm? Maybe it's 10. Do you know what I mean? And I'd say that's kind of more realistic.
Yeah.
But you need to be prepared for the fact that you just hit your goal.
Yeah.
And an announcement comes from the White House and it drops 30%. So you have to be mindful of that too.
Yeah. There's also a lot of people waiting for whatever product comes up whatever product, that Simon Harris introduces. And they're kind of waiting. They want to invest, but they're waiting for that to come along. Do you think it makes sense for them to hold on?
No.
Okay.
Because you can start today and save whatever amount you want today. I believe that they're calling it the PIA, the personal investment account. That's the working title. I do believe it will come in. I don't know when. And you don't want to be waiting for Godot. So if you've made a decision and a commitment now to start saving your 50 a month, whatever it is, do it now. And then if and when it launches, say it launches this time next year, great. You just take what you have and put it in as a lump sum and start your savings in there. So there's no impediment. Well, under the structure that they're proposing, it looks like it's going to lean more on the ISA model in the UK. Well, that's up to 20,000 a year. So you can take the few quid you squirreled away for 8, 9, 10 months, whatever, and put it in. But no, if this is what you've decided to do it now. Don't defer, because it could take them 18 months. Like, let's be honest, it's the government, right? So it could take 18 months for it to get off the ground, or for a suitable product that meets your needs be launched. So therefore, there's nothing stopping you transferring what you've accumulated and putting it in. But it is a great idea and everyone should do it. I really mean that. Anything that you can do, if you can save tax, it kills people when they see the tax on their investments. So if you can save tax, take advantage of it.
Robert Whelan, thank you so much.
Very welcome.